Previously on Myron and Jenny Leavitt, praying through a parent's greatest fear.
There by myself, in the waiting room, just waiting. And the nurses came out and said, he's awake and he wants to talk to you. We didn't want him to catch wind of this on the news or somebody else tell him, I had to go in and break the news that Jacob is gone. And in this same conversation, I have to have this conversation with him that says, and son, listen, the cops are going to come and talk to you. And here's what I want you to say when they do. So I'm prepping him for this inevitable conversation with the police, with the investigators. Like I said, by the grace of God, that is not who he came through it. And
if any of the listeners, I know since you're in the medical field, you probably know what that is, but any of the listeners don't know the ICU psychosis. ICU staff wasn't surprised. They got help and they had to restrain him and sedate him. But, they said it happens. I was standing out in the hallway and I just was like, oh God, please, no, please don't let this be the way he's going to be, because I think it was less than 24 hours that he'd been awake. So we didn't know, is this really going to be what it is for the rest of his life? We get him back, but this is what we get back. We lose one son completely and we get this back. All this is going through my mind when I'm out in the hallway and I'm just like, oh man.
So did they ever really figure out what had happened? The accident?
The two teenagers, they were both 18 years old, had just graduated from high school in that May, the end of August. They had just got together, want to go drink, and somebody bought them a large amount of alcohol and they got totally wasted. Where the accident happened was not far from where they lived. They came from the smaller road across the 4-lane highway at about 70 miles an hour. And again, who ran the red light? I don't know. There was never any judgment on that. They never worked this whole situation out to find out who did what and where. They ran the light going 70 miles an hour. They were in a Chevy 2500 pickup truck, so it's a big truck. They hit Caleb's doorpost. He was the one driving. They hit him right in the driver's side and literally ripped the entire front end of the vehicle off, and it did start on fire. We have the 911 recordings that a guy is calling in, there's been a terrible accident. I see somebody inside the car. It's on fire. What do I do? How do I get him out? So again, just the grace of God that there was, he wasn't severely burned. When they hit our sons, their truck actually flipped and rolled several times as well. Like I said, unfortunately, you hear this way too often, that the ones that were drunk and driving are the ones that walk away from it. And that's exactly what happened. The one, the one who was driving would not give a breathalyzer on scene, so they had to pull his blood at the hospital. And he actually ended up being legal for anybody over 21 in Florida is 0.08, and he was a 0.22, the legal limit. To continue the story, we ended up, of course, we got the lawyers. They're helping us. Caleb's got to go through several weeks, months rehab before he comes home. We end up getting a court date. The one witness who said that she thought Caleb ran the red light, she was like a mile away. Again, it's at night. She's like over a mile away when she thinks that she sees Caleb run the red light, and she missed the court date anyway. She missed that court date. So the judge just said, all right, you have no witnesses. I'm throwing this out. At that point, charges against Caleb were dropped. Then we find out that the one who was driving, he ended up getting...
He had already been sentenced and we had no idea. He had already gone to court months. Caleb's court date was over a year after the accident. So for that whole first year, we had that hanging over our family while he's recovering, this looming threat that he could still be found guilty of vehicular manslaughter. And we didn't know until that court date when the two young men, because they were subpoenaed to Caleb's court date, we found out that day that they had already had their day in court and already been sentenced and everything. Actually, the passenger didn't get anything, and the driver,
if I remember correctly, he got 100 hours of community service, one night in jail, lost his driver's license for 6 months. months, I think, and that was the extent.
And he said it was his first offense and that the judge did everything he could to the extent of the law. To us, it felt like a slap in the face. So within that first year, like I think the first time that he shared publicly about our story, him especially, had been in communication with our son's high school because, like he said, Jacob had just finished his second week of his senior year. And so he'd been in communication with the principal quite a bit. The school was awesome, about that kind of thing. And make a long story short, Myron spoke at the baccalaureate that year and was able to share our story. I won't go into the side story now about the poem that we found that Jacob wrote. Or Myron told you earlier that Caleb was really the writer. So there's a whole story that I won't get into now about that. That was definitely a God thing that we found that. But he read that poem and he was able to share, and that was the first time. And then since then, he has shared our story pretty much anywhere that they ask him to share it. He's done football stadiums of juniors and seniors in high schools with the mock DUIs and down to smaller settings for Teen Challenge or, wherever they ask him to speak. And then in 2017, because we were over the children's ministry at the time, we weren't in the active pastorate at the time when it happened. But in 2017, we answered the call to come down to where we are now in Central Florida and church location down here. So that's what we've been doing since then.
More than anything, through all of this, you can take it one of two ways, right? You can go through this and not process correctly and allow it to ruin your life. And unfortunately, we probably all know people who've done that. They walk away, they end up bitter and angry, and their life ends up being a shell of what it could be because they didn't process it correctly. Or you can take the hand that's been dealt to you and say, you know what, I don't want to just survive. I want my life to make a difference. That's what we chose to do. Chose to, our story, hopefully give hope to others. Yes, it's a tragedy. Yes, it's terrible. Will you ever get over it? No, you'll never get over it. But there comes a point in life where it's a scar that will always be there, a wound that will always be there. But like any scar, if it heals correctly, you'll always know it's there, but it just doesn't hurt so much when you touch it. The healing process takes away that sharp pain. It never takes away all the pain. This was tragedy that happened in our life, but we're going to allow it to help us to change other people's lives. That's one of the most amazing things, when I partner with our sheriff's department here in Florida. It's when you're standing in front of 1,100 students and you're telling the story. When I walk away from there, I close the whole story down with our willingness to forgive. Because what we could have been bitter and angry and hate these young kids. All of us have made terrible mistakes in life. All of us have done things that we look back on now and regret doing. I walk away giving them this understanding that whatever life hands you, you have a choice what you're going to do with it. You're either going to let you hurt you and never recover, or you're going to choose to forgive and let people go. And that's such a message that this young generation needs to hear. So many are violated and hurt. They need to know that you can choose to forgive.